Hey, welcome to the Master Tech Lou channel. I am Lou. Right here behind me, is a 2003 Mercedes-Benz SL 500. I'm going to be using that as my guinea pig to explain to you how the Mercedes ABC suspension works. If you've seen my air suspension video, it's almost identical except for the physical components. All right, there's a couple extra sensors in it, a couple extra electrical connections, but ideally they work just the same. Basically, the control module is looking for level sensor input to determine the height, to know if it should add or take away fluid from the shocks. Super simple, don't overcomplicate it. I'm gonna do this in stages, and I will do a timeline so you guys can zip forward to the part that you wanna see. I'm actually gonna fix this one. I'm gonna try to. I've never done a valve block repair kit, but this car likes to drop overnight, or when it's running, it just keeps raising till it maxes out. So the valves cannot either keep it shut or the seals are leaking so the fluid can pass right by the valves, one of the two. So I'm going to attempt a repair kit for the front valve block in hopes that it fixes it. Although I feel that it's gonna need valves or a valve block, but I'm gonna take the gamble, take a shot at it. If it doesn't fix it, then I'll put the valve block in for free as far as labor's concerned, but as far as the part, customers willing to take a gamble on it too. So first thing we're gonna talk about is resetting. I hate that word. I only hate the word because I work online diagnosing cars and I see everybody's questions about how do I reset my car. You gotta fix it. That's the reset. Fix the car. The only module that you actually have to reset is a transmission module. And by reset, you have to clear the codes out of them, because in the Mercedes modules, once it stores the code, the trans is in limp home mode until the code is erased. So you can fix it, but unless you erase the code, it's still in limp home mode. So I don't like the word reset. You're gonna hear me complain about that a lot. Now, if you start the car and it says rising, it should be rising. If it says stop car too low, that's not a failure of a sensor or nothing. It's just telling you the car's too low. It should be raising itself. If the dash does not say visit workshop, that means there's no codes stopping it from working and it should be raising. So if you start it and it's not raising, you either have no fluid or you have a massive leak or your pump is bad and it's not allowing fluid to go to the system, all right? So number two, calibration mode. Do not enter calibration mode. If you entered calibration mode, I'll try to cover it later in the video about how to get out of calibration mode. It's very tricky. If you watch my air suspension video, I explain the same scenario in there. You have to set the ride height at a specific level. I'll explain that later. So there is no reset. Every time you shut the car off and you start it back up, the module checks the system. If there's no electrical faults, then the system will work as normal. If you shut the car off and turn it back on and it says visit workshop, there's a failure in the system. If you shut the car off and turn it back on, it says visit workshop, the failure's still there. If you fix the failure, turn the key off, turn it back on, it rechecks it every time the key's turned on. So it will work on its own if it's fixed. You don't have to reset anything. You don't have to clear codes out of it. It will work on its own once the problem goes away. I want to stress that because I don't want you to think that you put something in it and you just have to take it to a shop to get a reset, or you have to buy a scanner to erase the codes. It rechecks it every time you start the car. All right, got it? Now I'm gonna move on. In the engine bay, this is your oil tank. You're supposed to start the car, level the car, meaning just, start the car, let it level, make sure the switch is not in the raised position, make sure it's in the normal, no light position, shut the car off, wait 15 minutes, pull the dipstick, and it should be between the upper level, all right? When it's running, it's usually in between the lower level but we don't check it running. We check it off after 15 minutes. The lower indent is cold and the upper indent is hot. So the fluid level should be in between there. This is for your power steering. The same pump, it's called a tandem pump. It's got two sections. The back section is for power steering and the front section is for your ABC. On the ABC pump, there's a suction restrictor valve. That is the valve that allows fluid into the ABC pump. The return line has a filter on it. So the fluid is ready and willing to enter the pump. The valve opens up to allow the pump to suck it in. The pump pushes the fluid through the system. Any fluid that's not being used comes right back here to the filter into the reservoir tank. Okay? Acceleration sensor for the left front. The acceleration sensor for the right front is over there. You'll notice plugins on the tops of the struts. Those are plunger travel sensors. It tells the module how far the internal of the shock is. So if you have problems with a fault code of the travel sensors, it's either unplugged or you got a bad shock. All right, so that's all you're gonna see up here in the engine bay. Okay, there is also another acceleration sensor in the trunk, but you won't see it because it's hiding. I want to say it's here. I'll double check the information, but it's underneath the paneling. Okay, on the screen, I'm going to put a photo of the hydraulic system and where all the components go to, but I'm going to now show you also on the car. So if you want to pause the video while it's on there, you can take a look at that just to see, but then I'm going to show you on the car where they go. All right, so from the pump, from that gold muffler tube, that's the output from the ABC pump. Comes to this line up here to the front of the engine, all the way around to this foil covered tube, heat protection, to the back, all the way around the back of the engine, up the frame to the pressure supply block. Now this block has a pressure valve inside of it, a pressure relief valve, so when pressure gets too high, it will push the valve open and allow fluid to return back to the oil cooler and then back to the reservoir tank. Other than that, so you got the supply going in, one line goes to a T, which feeds the front valve block, and it feeds the rear valve block. Now when you look at this, it's intimidating, but don't be intimidated. Everything is easy to remove. There's a lot of rubber lines in between the steel lines, so you can at least remove them out of the way. There's a bunch of holders you can loosen, which would give you more slack in the lines. Working on ABC is actually easy. It's just tedious, and you have to go nice and slow and pay attention to what you're doing. Also, it's very important to make sure the system is not pressurized, okay? You can crack these bleeders loose here and on each line that go to the strut. You crack them loose nice and slow and let the fluid drip out. It'll actually relieve the pressure in the struts. You do not want to work on a pressurized system. What I did is I used my Autel, I hooked it up, and I went to the the control and locking valve of the front left and front right. And when I went in there, the key's off, so it's probably not gonna work. But when I went in there, let's see. I think the ignition's off. When I went in there, I activated the valve, and because the car was off, it allowed the shocks to relieve the pressure. So I got no pressure in the front shocks right now. Yeah, the key's off, so it's not gonna work. So you have a bleeder on all four corners. Now I don't use that to bleed the system. I mainly use that to relieve the pressure in them. The only time I would use that is if I put a new shock in there and I fill it with fluid, then I would crack that open just to make sure there's no air in the line. But there's only one way in and one way out, so I'm not really sure how they alleviate the air in the system, or it might just work its way out after a while. That's kind of the tricky part. That's after all these years, that's one thing I kind of understand is where does it go? Because there's only one way in. So can't say I've ever replaced one and had an issue, but yeah. So fluid is always being pushed around the front and rear valve blocks, okay? It's up to the valve block and the solenoids to open and allow fluid to the strut, and once it raises, it locks off, and the other valve should be open to allow the excess pressure to go right back to the cooler. So you always have pressure at the ready, and the valves determine when to let fluid in and out of the shock. So if you have a car that's leaking overnight, it's because these are not holding fluid. If there's no external leak, the leak is internal. So here is your front valve block. It's got a pulsation dampener on there. They have a couple different names, but since fluid cannot be compressed, they have a ball with a diaphragm in there, and it's filled with nitrogen, so it absorbs the pressure of the fluid, thereby giving fluid somewhere to kind of go. Same thing here. That absorbs the pressure from the pump, okay, because the pump's putting out pressure. One in the rear. Actually, there's two in the rear. So these absorb pressure. So if you ever have an ABC that's super bouncy, it's because you're bouncing off the fluid. There's nowhere for the fluid to bounce against. So these are ruptured, and it's kind of easy to tell which one, because if the rear bounces a lot, then the rear one's probably blown. If the front bounces a lot, the front's probably blown. If you hit a bump and all of a sudden the ABC warning come on and you got a code for no pressure, it's because these ruptured and it put air in the system, and the air just happened to pass by the pressure sensor, and you can't compress a fluid, but you can compress air. So once air gets by the pressure sensor, it sets a fault for no pressure or low pressure. That's a random scenario you run into. So these are very easy to diagnose. As far as, see, here's the other bleeder for the rear, same thing on the opposite side. So those are the hydraulic components. You got the pump that feeds it to this block that's basically a distribution block between the front and the rear, and also back to the reservoir. Then you have this guy that lets fluid in and out of the shocks. You have a bunch of lines going through the car. You got your shocks in the rear, you got your couplers. This one's actually leaking. I quoted him that. We're gonna replace that. A leak is a leak in a hydraulic system. I don't care how small it is, you do not want that leaking. There's wetness there, that shock gets replaced. So this one also has solenoids and stuff on it, okay? There's two valves. Solenoid valve, same thing to me. There's blocking and locking. So one that'll allow fluid to the strut, and the other one locks it in. And then this will open to allow fluid to relieve from the strut. So those are hydraulic components. Here's your level sensor for the front. Okay, if you have any codes for the level sensor, they're the same from this side to the other side. They're just mounted backwards. So all you have to do, if you want, unbolt it, unplug it, put it on the other side, plug it back in. If the code changes to the other side, you got a bad level sensor. That's the easiest way to diagnose these. Okay, so it's mounted to the upper control arm and it bolts to the frame. If there's an issue with ride height, sometimes you can loosen those and move the bracket around and get a little bit of extra movement in there and get the ride height to change. I don't like going to level calibration because you really never lose level calibration unless somebody physically messes with level sensor positions, or the control arm's not in the right spot, or that bracket got bent. So how does a level sensor work? Glad you asked. So I unbolted it from the control arm, and I have this set on live data for the left front level sensor, and I'm gonna do a bar graph. That way it might be easier for you guys to see. Basically, voltage goes into here, and based on the position of the arm, depends on how many volts are coming out to the module. You can read over here, we're outputting 0.78 tenths of a volt. As I move the arm, voltage changes. That's how the control module knows the level of the car, because it's connected to the upper control arm. Okay, so if the upper control arm goes up, we know that the car is low, so it's going to raise it. And if the upper control arm is down, it knows the car is high, so it's going to lower it. All right. If you have a failure of a level sensor, all you have to do is hook up a scanner, go to the live data. Let me just do show all. There's all the sensors, and move the sensor. Okay. Now bar graphs are okay, but let's do a line graph. So if I think I have a failure of a sensor and I move it, it should be a nice smooth sweep all the way up. Okay. Now if I'm moving it up and you see that, you know you got a bad sensor because it's cutting out. That's how you know you got a bad sensor. If you're moving it down nice and slow, you should see gradual. If it does that, hold on, it's not reflecting that fast. If it cuts in and out like that as you're moving slow, you know the signal's cutting out. Easiest way to diagnose sensors, either live data or swap it side to side. Fault codes are easy to diagnose in these because it's rarely a connection issue. It's usually a bad part. So if you got a pressure sensor issue, it's usually a bad pressure sensor. If you have a valve block issue, it's usually a bad valve block or solenoid on the valve block that's not replaceable separate. If you have a failure of a level sensor, it's usually a level sensor. Pretty easy to diagnose, and any electrical failure in the system is going to stop it from working. So if the dash says visit workshop, it's not going to work. The car is not going to raise. It's going to lock at the last place it was. So it may be locked high, maybe locked low. Now, if it's not raising and lowering and you have no warning on the dash, somebody probably entered calibration mode and the car is not going to move until calibration mode is exited or completed. So you got to have a scanner to read fault codes to see what the fault code is. There will be a fault code for level calibration not complete if level calibration was activated and never done. So what I'm getting after with this one is ABC is pretty smart. The only thing you can do with an ABC electrical fault is verify the wiring is good from the part to the module, which is under the dash in this car. If you ohm the wires and they all ohm good, then you got a bad part. So if you got plunger travel sensor faults, it's a shock. If you have a pressure sensor fault and it comes and goes, the ABC pump is either working or it's not, right? So if you have a car that raises and works, but you drive it and you get a fault, you have air in the system, or you might have a bad pressure sensor. Sometimes those are ones you can't really ohm and test. They're just kind of glitchy, we can say. Imagine there's always 2000 PSI pushing on that sensor. It's gonna wear in that spot. I've seen it back in the day with oil pressure switches where once you have 60 pounds of, or not 60, but you got high oil pressure, it's great. But once oil pressure, oil warms up and the pressure drops down a little bit, it sets a light for the oil pressure switch because the sensor is used to riding in a certain spot, and all of a sudden it gets past that spot, it sets a fault, right? So that can happen with the pressure sensors on these. Now I'm not saying if you got a fault code, replace the part. I'm still saying do your diagnosis, but the diagnosis is pretty simple in ABC. There's not a whole lot of head scratching when it comes to diagnosing the ABC. I will say the worst problem I ever had is when the car was off, fluid would overflow out of the oil tank and just pour everywhere. What was happening was not only was the fluid leaking past the valve blocks, but the suction restrictor valve on the pump was stuck open at all times. So as soon as I shut the car off, any pressure that was kind of bleeding, it wasn't locking anywhere. It would just fill right back to the tank. The whole car would drop and it would pour all the fluid. It would pop the dipstick out and it would pour it all over the engine bay. It drove me bonkers to figure out what was happening with that car because there's really no test for the valve and it's not replaceable separate, right? So that was kind of tricky. I believe that's all I can do with the electrical portion and the sensors. All right, you got questions? Hit me up in the comments. So flushing fluid and replacing the filter, it's a two-man job. There's a couple different ways you can do it. If you've heard of the famous rodeo, you don't have to do the rodeo. You don't have to do the pitch or the roll or the dynamic where it does the corners. It's nice to do that. You don't have to do that. You can accomplish the same thing with having someone sit in a car, hit the raise to raise it all the way up, wait for it to stabilize, hit the lower and lower it all the way down. As you're doing that, have the hose for the filter into a bucket and make sure you're just there filling new cans of fluid. If you want it done right to make sure all the fluids is gone, you're talking a case or two of fluid. It's a lot of fluid just to make sure that it's clean, and then you replace the filter, all right? You can go ahead and get a scanner that will do rodeo and all that. It's accomplishable without it. So if I go to active test, I can do dynamic, rodeo, and all that stuff. So I'll let you see what it looks like on the Autel screen. All right, so having a scanner that can do this, you can do this with the Autel, and I can also do it with my X-Tool A30M. There's a couple different scanners. It's got to be a multi-system scanner or all-system scanner with bi-direction control to get into the ABC. I find that a lot of aftermarket scanners, they have trouble reading the suspension units, whether it be aromatic or ABC. So make sure you do your homework on that, or have a return policy. So if you buy it and try it and it doesn't work, you can send it back, so you're not stuck with a scanner. Diagnosis is pretty simple on ABC. If you shut the car off and the car lowers, if it lowers on one axle or like one wheel or both front or both rear, it's very easy. If it lowers and there's no external leak, it's leaking internally. You can try fluid flushing first, because sometimes the dirt from the rubber O-rings and whatever else is in the system, and maybe the pump wearing, the metal that's in there, can clog the control valves. So you can maybe get a scanner to activate the dynamic and stuff and see if it frees them up, or just keep hitting raise and lower a bunch of times. But if there's no external leak, where's the fluid gonna go? It can't compress, not like the air suspension, where the air suspension can change a whole lot with temperature. I don't see a whole lot of temperature change with fluid. Right now, there's specs in the system that say it can lower so much overnight because of temperature differences. That's fine, but you're not gonna notice 30 millimeters. You're gonna notice a whole 6 inches, you know? But if it lowers in the whole front or the whole rear or any corner, it's a valve block. You're gonna be replacing the valve block. They have updated valve blocks that aren't supposed to have that same issue. I haven't really seen one after the update, but sometimes the cars just don't return to the dealership. You know, you never know where these cars go. But fluid, make sure you're using Pentacin. You can use whatever brand you want. Pentacin is Pentacin. As long as it meets the spec, you met the spec. Don't have to be nothing fancy. Don't try to ever put any kind of stop leak in these systems. There's 2,000, 3,000 PSI in these things. Stop leak ain't helping nothing. What's gonna stop the leak is a fixed line. Now, the lines can be pretty expensive and hard to replace. I have seen people go to like Napa with a line and have them make their own hydraulic line. I'm not gonna say you should do that. I'm not gonna say you shouldn't do that. It's up to you, whatever you choose. To me, I'm a Mercedes-Benz dealer tech. Replace it with the right parts. They worked that long to begin with. They're gonna work that long when you're done, right? So I hope this video helps with the ABC system. It's a little bit easier than the aromatic system. You know what I can do? I am going to finish doing this valve block in this car. And then when I'm done, maybe I'll walk through the level calibration just to give you an idea of what it entails. All right, when you're doing level calibration, it's going to first have you set the ride height where you want it. Now, what I do if you're not in the dealership and you're not in an alignment rack and you're not using the right gauge, like a Ramus gauge, which I'll explain in a second, is I would make sure the front is equal side to side and make sure the rear is equal side to side. And I make sure the voltage of the level sensors are 2.5 volts. So first I go to my level screen to where I can activate the level, and I watch the voltage of the sensors, and I make sure the voltage of the sensors is about 2.5. Once I'm there, then I go to calibration mode. In calibration mode, when it tells you to adjust ride height, you're already there. Just pass through it. It's gonna ask you for a degree, and it's gonna tell you a sweep between minus a number and minus another number, or plus a number and plus another number. You wanna pick what's right in the middle. If you don't have one of these and you're not doing this the right way, you wanna pick what's right in the middle. So if you pick the middle angle value matched with the 2.5 volts, it's gonna pass calibration. the car's smart, so you can't lie to it. Once you lie to it, it'll keep kicking you out. All right, you can keep guessing at numbers till you get it through, but then your level's going to be off. All right, so that's the way that I've helped people in the past do this without doing it the right way. So let me show you about this guy and where we use it and what happens with it. The Ramis gauge. It basically shows the angle of the lower control arm. Based on the angle of the lower control arm, the module or the alignment machine can tell where caster and camber should be, because that's how we're telling the ride height. That's how we tell the ride height. Where in American cars, you might measure it. With Mercedes, we use the Ramis gauge. It tells us a degree, and the degree tells the alignment machine how high or how low the car is, so we can set caster camber. So when we're doing the level calibration, the number it asks is the number we're going to get with the Ramis. So normally, I'm moving it off the lower control arm. We're going to say we're about somewhere in there is where we're at if we're level. If the car's on the ground running at the correct lowered ride height, right? So we're going to put that value in, and then it's going to allow us to pass calibration mode. So this is what it's asking you for, is the angle of the lower control arm. This is the gauge we have to use. That's why I get so angry when people hit calibration mode. And the only reason I get angry is because I don't like to do things that I don't know what I'm doing. I don't like to guess at things. I like to have the information at hand to know why I'm doing it. If your level is off, the level is off because something is bent. One of the level sensors arm is bent, or it's not located properly in the right holder or mounting. That's the only way level is going to be off. Now, if you replace a control arm or a lower control arm, it's really not messing with the level. If you replace a shock, it's not messing with the level, because the level is going to change based on the hydraulic fluid in the shock, and it uses the sensor. So the only thing that can change the level in my brain and my experience is the mounting of the sensor. If the mounting of the sensor never changes, then nothing else could affect the height. All right, that's just what my brain's telling me. Tells me some weird things sometimes. But now the only thing I didn't show is the level sensors in the rear. Where's this guy hiding at? So let me flip this around. So here's a sensor in the rear. So if I take that bracket and I bend that bracket, or if I loosen those nuts, it's going to change the way the arm is positioned, which is going to change the value, which is going to tell the module to adjust it to get the value where it wants to see for the voltage. So again, as long as the sensors are mounted where they should be, there's no reason to enter calibration mode. If you have a problem with ride height, something is messed up with one of these, or the mounting of these. Now there's a lot more to ABC that I didn't talk about. When you're driving on a highway, it lowers for aerodynamics, right? If you shut the car off, it will, depending on the car, it might lower a little bit for ease of getting back into it. It can't raise, not like an air suspension, because the engine has to be running to push pressure through. So there's a lot of functions of it that I'm not explaining. There's too much, right? I think there's ABC videos on YouTube that'll explain. There's WIS documents. WIS is Workshop Information System, that explain how the system works and a little bit more technical details to what I'm saying. But the basics of it is there's a reservoir tank that lets fluid go to the pump. There's a valve on the pump that is always closed, but it opens to let fluid into the pump. The pump is going to take that fluid and push it to that first valve block in the wheel well. From that wheel well valve block, it goes to front and rear valve blocks. All right, from the front block, it allows pressure into the strut, and it locks it so it keeps it in there, or it opens and allows it out to go back to the return to the cooler, back to the reservoir. Same thing with the rear valve block. While the fluid's in there and the car's riding, the pulsation dampeners have a diaphragm in there that the fluid's pushing against. Okay, and there's nitrogen here, right? So this is a big ball. Fluid's coming in here. Here's a diaphragm. Here's the gas. It's bouncing on it, right? Once that ruptures, it's hard locked fluid. It can't go nowhere. So if you got bouncy, if your car's bouncing everywhere you go, you got bad dampeners. If you own like a 06 and later, and you have a really loud vibration and your floor, right, and it goes away with RPM, It's the pulsation dampener on the pump, because they fail and now you're feeling the fluid being pushed through the system. That's another thing they do. It's like a fuel pressure regulator. It actually just absorbs all the pulses from a pump, because the pump is like pumping, right? It's not like a smooth flow, it's pumping, doom, 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 doom. So that's what the pulsation dampener does, is it absorbs those. Once that's gone away and that fails, you feel all the pulses of the pump. That's what you're feeling in your foot. So you got to replace the dampeners on the pump. Fluid loss, you should not have to add fluid, right? If you have to add fluid, you got a small leak. Any leak in this system is a leak. Any sign of wetness, replace the part, all right? It's not gonna get better. Sometimes these lines like to get a pinhole in them for some reason. It's really weird. While it'll just decide where a hole is gonna start and just start shooting fluid everywhere. You have to be careful with these systems. There's something called hydraulic fluid injection. Fluid is under extreme amounts of pressure. It will actually pierce your skin and force its way into your bloodstream. Once that happens, that's very, very dangerous. I worked for a forklift company for a couple years, and I did safety. So I have now stuff ingrained into my brain of people that have been hurt by trying to crack a line open while there's pressure. It will spray a fine line. It'll cut things off. It'll pierce right through your skin. So please be very careful in working on these things. Make sure they're not pressurized. The way to not pressurize them is to slowly crack the bleeders loose or use a scanner to depressurize it, all right? That's the only safe way you can do that. So if you have any questions, comments, concerns, don't ask until you subscribe, hit the notification, hit a like, share with your favorite forum, share with your Mercedes buddies. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to hit me up on YouTube. I try to reply to all of them if I can. For some reason, some comments don't come through notifications. I got to go through the YouTube studio to find them. I guess it depends on how you comment or where you comment. And if you're vulgar and you don't like me or what I say, just don't watch the video. It's as easy as that. Hit the skip button and just keep going. It's fine. It's fine. I'm not for everybody. It's okay. But again, my name is Lou, Master Tech Lou channel. This has been a video on the ABC. Watch the air suspension. They're interchangeable because the level sensor values and the control module, they work just the same. It's just looking to find the value that's stored in it with the level sensors by adding or taking away fluid. It's as easy as that, guys. So, hey, I hope this helps. I'm gonna get on this valve block. I'm gonna try to see if I wanna do a video on this. I'm not sure this is gonna work, so I'm not sure if I wanna make a video on me failing at something. But yeah, take care. Hey, before you go anywhere, it worked. It worked. I didn't have time today to record a video on me doing the valve block repair, but I did it. Let me show you the seals. Here's all the seals from the seal kit. Here's how they come. All right, I got it from, let me show you the site here. Still up on my eBay. X8R from eBay. Okay, I was using that to watch the seal. Anyways, the issue I had was when it was running at idle, the front would just keep creeping up. The front would just keep creeping up. It would just keep raising and raising and raising and raising and block out all the way as high as it could. But once it hit the raise button, it would lower back to the raise position, and then it would creep, 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 creep. I've had this thing here running for about 10 minutes now, and nothing. Deadlocked. Right where it should be. It's not moving at all. It's not rocking up and down. The rear hasn't moved. The rear's been fine. I was gonna do the rear just because, but I may wait on that just to confirm that the front worked. You never want to do too much at one time. If I were to replace too many components at one time, there's an issue. Now I don't know what the issue is. But it's there, man. It hasn't moved. It's been sitting in one spot. Being a dealer tech, it's hard to want to take a gamble on this kind of stuff. We would just replace the valve block, you know. But after seeing this so far, I couldn't see any failures of the O-rings and Teflon rings, but they, you know, they wear, and there's nothing you can do. It's not, I'm not gonna get down there and measure them. Can't measure their O-rings. But just wanted to add this to the video, that if you're thinking about rebuilding your valve block, I would. I just did, and it worked. So the only thing that concerns me, on one of the valves, the smaller of the two valves, the middle piston can come out, and there's actually a Teflon ring on that one too. I would like to know if there's a company that makes that green one that's on there. I would feel more confident if that one was replaced too. But it's holding steady. I think the customer's going to be happy that he didn't have to pay $2,500 for a valve block. Both left and right raised. The whole front would raise and lower, raise and lower, raise and lower. Actually, it would raise and lock up there, but after the module would recognize it was too high, it would drop down. But then when I'd shut it off overnight, it would sag and it would drop. It would drop fast too. The left side would drop really quick, the right side would take some time. So hey, don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the notification, check out all my other review videos. Thanks for checking out the Master Tech Lou channel. My name is Lou. You guys take care. Well, overnight it held. That is awesome. Overnight it held the level. Measured it yesterday, wrote it down. Measurements, and we are good this morning. Well, I now believe in the valve block repair kits, so I'm gonna wait till winter time to do his rear one because the rear is okay for right now. But heck yeah, man. Hope this helps. Any questions, comments, concerns, hit me up. Don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell. Take care.